Okay, we're now live. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy. The Greater Victoria School District wishes to recognize and acknowledge the Esquimalt and Songhees nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. I just want to quickly pass it over to Trustee Duncan, who will again make the announcement.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Chairman Bobby. I appreciate that. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to briefly pass along some regrets from a few trustees this evening. So trustees McNally, Carmichael, and David send their regrets. They're not able to be here this evening. And then I also wanted to just announce that I've assigned Trustee Natalie Bayot to Education Policy and Direction Standing Committee. Trustee Bayot will be joining the Education Policy and Direction Standing Committee effective immediately. Thank you to Trustee Bayot for your flexibility. I realized that there was short notice, and I just really appreciate your willingness to join this committee. And so moving forward, the voting members of the committee will be Trustee Mabobi, who is chair, Trustee Bayot, Trustee McNally, Trustee David, and then myself. Thank you.
Welcome, Trustee Bayot. All right, so I will move us over to A2 in the agenda, approval of the agenda. I'm wondering if anybody has any changes. I do have one amendment that I'm wondering if maybe we can approve by consensus. I have one more speaker that would like to be added, Ryan Bro, so that would be at B5. I was wondering if anybody had any objections or all good to go. I got a thumbs up from Trustee Duncan, so yeah, looks good. Okay, perfect. So we'll add that to the agenda this evening. So can I please, all those in favor of approval of the agenda? And that is unanimous. Moving on to A3, approval of the minutes. The recommended motion is that the April 3rd, 2023 Education Policy and Directions Committee meeting minutes be approved. Go ahead, Trustee Duncan.
I'm happy to move the minutes.
Excellent. And can I get, sorry, all those in favor of approval of the minutes? And that is unanimous. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Excellent. So moving on to section B of the agenda, presentations to the committee. And I'm going to pass it over to Boma for the from the Support Network for Indigenous Women of Color. And the floor is yours.
Hello, good evening. Hope everybody can hear me. I'm Boma. I am the Executive Director of the Support Network for Indigenous Women and Women of Color, joining in from the unceded territories of the Lekwungen and Wisconsin people, close to Esquimalt First Nation. I sent a letter over to the board on Friday. I will not rehash the details of that letter, but we sort of speak to a few other things that I think are important for making your, for this discussion today about SLOs in school. I am here today to talk about the work that we do at SNEWOC and how it's relevant to this issue. We're an organization that looks at reproductive justice, and part of our reproductive justice mandate is also an understanding that women have the right to send their kids to school, and those kids have the right to also feel safe in institutions of learning. And our focus, I focus today on marginalized youth. And when I talk about marginalized youth, I'm talking about BIPOC youth, I'm talking about queer youth, I'm talking about trans youth, I'm talking about two-spirit youth. These are youth that I believe are the most negatively impacted by the presence of SLOs. And this is for a few reasons. The first reason is that I believe that a police officer is not bound by the same restraints and physical contact policies and all that are enforced by teachers and other school staff. And part of additional to that is the fact that SLOs receive the same protections that they do everywhere as police officers. And so it means that the consequences of bad behavior is often non-existent, as opposed to, I don't know, for instance, a teacher who behaves badly. There's procedures and policies where schools can take care of that and make sure that doesn't happen again. With police officers, like I mentioned in my letter, the Vic PD has a history of unfortunately targeting racialized youth and not punishing officers when there's examples of bad behavior. And I'm wondering if this is something that the school district supports. There's lots of articles that show that police officers in school do not prevent crime. They do not decrease crime. Instead, it leads to harsher punishments for marginalized youth, for non-criminal activity, and also can increase the school to prison pipeline, which I'm sure the school to prison pipeline is something that the board is familiar with, so I will not go into detail to explain that. Looking at data from SLO's presence and activities in schools, it shows that, you know, people have called SLOs for something as simple as disciplining kids, something as simple as picking up dog poop on school property, right? And so when I say non-criminal activity is criminalized, that's what I'm talking about. And at the bottom of the letter I sent, I talked about the fact that, you know, dozens of respondents reported negative or very negative past interactions with SLOs. So it's 32 BIPOC students, respondents, 13 Indigenous respondents, 62 LGBTQIA plus respondents, and 107 white respondents. And so although those numbers might not seem, they may look like statistics, numbers on a page, as an organization that has been advocating for the mental health of racialized families and youth, we know what those negative impacts look like on a day-to-day. We've heard many stories over the past few years about the impact of police violence on BIPOC youth and their families. We know that many BIPOC youth are leaving SD61 with trauma. And part of that trauma could be from police violence or racism in other areas of schooling. And this is something that, you know, we feel is very concerning. Kids should not come to school and be traumatized. And one of the reasons why we have a free counseling program. One of the questions that we ask our clients when they access a service is, why do you need counseling? Like, what sort of issues are you going through? How can we support you? And police violence and racism is at the top of the list. So we see clients, youth, families who are needing support because they have PTSD, they have hypervigilance, they have depression, they have anxiety. And this is something that's well researched, that we know that BIPOC communities and marginalized youth are experiencing negative mental health impacts from the presence of police in schools and outside schools. And I strongly believe that schools should be a place of safety and not a reason for trauma. And so, like I concluded in the letter, we believe that even if one student feels unsafe with SLOs in schools, this should prompt a quick response to end the program, because, you know, every child deserves to feel safe and welcomed in school and in their community. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Boma. I should have mentioned before the presentation that the speakers tonight will have 5 minutes each. You've actually finished in 4 minutes, so that was awesome. Great job. I'd like to open up the floor if anybody has questions for Boma. Oh, I see a microphone has turned on. Mark Jenkins.
I just have a question. Throughout that presentation, there was reference to data. Are you able to source this data?
Yeah, I'm happy to send you links to all the data that I referred to.
Okay, could you do
or
that?
Or I can also post it in the chat as well before I leave as well.
Thank you.
I also see Trustee Duncan's hand. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, did I not unmute myself? Sorry, I see Trustee Duncan, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you very much to Boma. I just want to say thank you very much to Boma for being here. You know, we appreciate you taking the time to share this information with the board, to share your perspective. Just want to say that, you certainly aren't, none of the presenters tonight are obliged to answer questions, but of course that is also your right if you wish.
Thank you. Yeah, just to follow up on the previous question about the data, I'm not sure if everybody here got a copy of my letter, because my letter has links and references to all the research that I referred to. I'm happy to copy and paste that in the chat. It's long, but I can also kind of skim through the letter and write and refer to all the research that I referred to, not just in the speech, but also in the letter, which basically rehashed that.
Thanks so much, Boma. We appreciate that very much. And thank you so much, Trustee Duncan, for the reminder. Speakers do not have to answer questions. That was my assumption. I'm sorry about that. I also see one more hand from Trustee Kwan.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say a quick thank you for coming and for presenting for your letter earlier, as well as presenting. It takes a lot of courage to come up and talk in front of everyone. So I really do appreciate you coming and speaking with us.
And lastly, before we move on to the next speaker, I just want to acknowledge Tracy Humphreys from VCPAC has, there's a comment in the chat. Her sound isn't working and she, maybe I can just read it. My apologies, my sound isn't working, but I'm listening to Boma speak on YouTube on my phone. Thank you, Boma, for speaking to what I've heard from some IBPOC families who are not comfortable speaking out on it publicly. VCPAC doesn't have a position on this issue, but I wanted to voice my own personal support for speaking in a potentially difficult space. Thanks so much for that comment, Tracy. Go ahead, Trustee.
Yeah, hi, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I'm having some trouble with my connection, unfortunately. I'm going to try to just turn off the video and hopefully that will help.
Sounds great, no problem. And yeah, let me know if you're having further connection issues. You can feel free to text me as well if that comes up again.
Thanks. And I just wanted to, I wasn't sure of my earlier comments, if you could hear me or if I froze before I stated just my thanks to Boma for being here. And I also just wanted to reiterate to any of the presenters tonight, you're certainly not obliged to answer questions, but if you would like to answer questions, then of course we also appreciate that.
Thanks again, Trustee Duncan. All right, and with that, I will move us forward to our next speaker. So I'll pass it over to Matt Christie.
Evening, folks. Can you hear me okay? Great. All right, good evening. My name is Matt Christie. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a grade 3-4 teacher and social justice chair for the GVTA. My intent tonight is to advocate to end SPLO programs. And as a member of the SPLO review committee, I want to help the trustees understand the 2,000+ page document that's before you. I've sat on the committee for the last 3 years and attended every meeting of the review. I want to emphasize that the review has never been about popular opinion on SPLO programs or what the majority of people's experience with police is. The review was brought by EBOC community members to look at specific impacts on SPLOs and police in general on marginalized populations. So by definition, we're not talking about the majority, we're talking about the minority. So indeed, when you look at the population of transgender people in Victoria, they make up roughly 2% of the population. People with disability make up 5%. EBOC folks make up about 17% of Victoria. So with that in mind, it's important to realize that when we're looking at the School Police Liaison Program Survey Summary Report, the numbers are significant. To find that 16% of staff, students, and families feel uncomfortable or very uncomfortable with the program means 1 in 6 people. We see that 2% of respondents had very negative experiences with SPLOs. That's 76 people. And another 114 on top of that reported having negative experiences. Despite being in the minority, these people have courageously come forward to express their concerns, and it is for this reason that the Human Rights Commissioner has said it is incumbent upon you, the trustees, to produce independent evidence of a need for SLOs that cannot be met through civilian alternatives. Our committee has not proved this. What much of the review highlights is that while there is not much research directed specifically at SLO programs, there is, however, as stated by the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, study after study, including government commissioned reports that demonstrate we have an issue with systemic racism throughout our justice system, including our police services. Indeed, the Supreme Court of Canada has recognized we Canadians have arrived at a place where the research now shows disproportionate policing of racialized and low-income communities. This is echoed in the BC Civil Liberties Review on Racial Profiling and the Intercultural Association's report on racism in Victoria that found that 30% of EBOC folks experienced racism from police. We know through research like the event level outcomes of police interactions with young people in 3 non-metropolitan cities across British Columbia, Canada, that youth are having these same experiences with police. It does not make sense to believe that the students in our district are somehow exempt from these experiences. SPLOs are on-duty officers and need to carry out the functions of police and represent that institution. It is imperative that you read through the entirety of the documents presented to you, starting with the BC Human Rights Commissioner letter and subsequent report titled Equity is Safer, Human Rights Considerations for Policing Reform in British Columbia, to help situate our SPLO review in proper context and understand the position of the GVTA and other groups that have called for ending SPLO programs. It will also help make evident that voting to end the program does not mean abandoning services to schools and students, but rather is an invitation to do things differently, to reinvest in thinking and services that will make schools more inclusive, diverse, and equitable. I believe the clarifying points under cessation provide clear guidance on the next steps this board needs to undertake to make our schools safer for all students. At the core of this issue is a question of safety, and it is evident that SLOs do not make schools safer. We have firsthand experience of that in our district, as our schools of Victoria and Esquimalt have not had SPLOs for the last 5 years, and things are fine. We can see through reports like the BCTF report on policing, that the mere presence of SPLOs in schools can have significant impact on staff and students, making them feel unsafe. Because policing is not uniform across communities, particular communities feel more targeted, surveilled, and intimidated by police. And this is not because of a lack of friendly interaction with police, but because people in those communities experience what's called adverse effect discrimination. As stated by the Human Rights Commissioner, the issue is not whether there are a few bad apples who work as police officers in BC. The issue is whether practices or attitudes within BC services have, whether by design or impact, the effect of violating human rights of certain racialized groups. 5 minutes is not enough time to address all the concerns or issues. I'm happy to stick around to the meeting and answer further questions. You have a massive report to look through, but I want to end by reinforcing that we cannot take a colorblind approach to this issue and prioritize the views of police services over the lived experience of impacted people. And I agree with Constable Daryl Underwood when he said that policing is not the only racist institution in Canada. I fully implicate schools in colonial racism, and this review is our district trying in one small way to address that legacy by looking at people in the margins and trying to make schools safer for them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Matt. Since Matt has expressed that he's happy to take any questions, I'd like to welcome any of those at this time. Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you. I come to you now as a parent, and I guess the question I have for you, Mr. Christie, is the removal of all SLOs from the school. First of all, I would say that's inaccurate. Although the school liaison program hasn't existed for Victoria, we have been very much involved in schools, and we continue to do so outside of the formal program. I also know Saanich also has SLOs that are in the Victoria Police Department. So I would say that it is inaccurate to say that we haven't been in school for 5 years. I come to you now as a parent. Removing schools, moving police from schools. I'd like to know how you address the issue of the rise in school lockdowns, legitimate school lockdowns we've had in the region and across the nation. School liaison officers are the police officers that go in there. They speak to children, they speak to staff to make sure that those children during an imminent threat are safe. I'm not sure who else would do that. The question that I've had put forth to me that those issues only happen to the south. If Bank of Montreal shooting wasn't a wake-up call for all of us, then I don't know what is. I have 3 children in school. I expect if there's a threat, an imminent threat that comes to my children's school, that this board has a responsibility to keep those kids safe. That my 3 children come home at the end of the day. The only way that they're going to be able to do that is to know what to do during that threat. That's my first question. My second question is now, and I'm not sure if the board.
Sorry, Mark.
Members,
if I may interrupt, maybe we can start with one question and then.
Okay. So my question. So let me wrap it up. My question is, how are you dealing with the increase in lockdowns and keeping children safe during that time, as well as the threat of the mainland gangs that have now infiltrated our school? Many different instances and cases of that in the Victoria School District. How do we keep our kids safe without police officers being involved? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I can answer that. I mean, I think that if you look at the recommendations that accompanied the GVTA letter and also the recommendations that are written within the report, it's not, there's no recommendation that says that police under any circumstance are not allowed in schools. I think that there is a recognition that there are times if there's an imminent threat that police would be needed. That's different from having an SLO person in the school. I think that that's something that can be figured out and worked on, what the exact best protocol is for addressing that. But I don't think it's an issue of saying that we wouldn't have responses for that. And I think that the general idea is that the shifting, it's about a shift of services to be proactive so that it's not about responding to things that have already happened. The hope is to prevent those things from happening by having adequate services in place to support the mental health needs of students, to support address things at the root cause as best as possible with, that we can, right? So I think it's looking at that shift, but the idea is certainly not to make schools less safe, it's to make them more safe, and to do that through being proactive and creating supports that will really address things at its core.
Thank you for that, Matt. Mark, before we move on to your second question, I'd like to move through a couple of other hands that are up, and then we'll circle right back to you if that's okay. I saw Trustee Duncan's hand up, so I will pass it over to her.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, we appreciate that. I just wanted to thank Matt for his work on the commitment to that work. We as a diverse committee, and there were a lot of different views around the table, and everyone really made their best efforts to do their due diligence, come to the committee prepared, and be respectful around the table. Acknowledging that there were various views around the table, but I just really wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you, and also to just sort of say, look, this is a highly emotive subject, and so I appreciate that as we proceed through our discussions both this evening and in the coming weeks, that we continue to just keep in mind that we all want what's best for students. That's at the heart of what we do, and just to thank everybody for their patience and for creating space for respectful dialogue. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks so much, Trustee Duncan, for that reminder. So it looks like we still have a few hands up, so I'm going to pass it over to Trustee Bayo, followed by Trustee Kwan, followed by Jody, and then we'll circle back to Mark, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. Go ahead, Trustee Bayo.
Yeah, I just also wanted to thank Matt for coming to speak. I think it's nice to have some context around the document. I have not made it through all of the pages yet, but I am, committed to reading through all of the recommendations. And yeah, I think it's really important that we have that focus on who this situation affects and how, people might have different perspectives, but we also just really need to look at what is best and safest for our students.
Thank you, Trustee Bio. I'll pass it over to Trustee Kwan now.
Thank you. So first of all, thanks, Matt, for that presentation. Really do appreciate it. And my questions actually come in a roundabout way, just from some of the comments that Mr. Jenkins had in response. And so I guess my first one was that, yeah, my understanding was actually that we were looking specifically at the school police liaison officers and not, schools, police, coming into schools for other reasons. So unless there's something that I don't know when police would withdraw all services if we were looking at the SPLO program, then I would assume that that would continue. And then I also have some concerns about the issue that Mr. Jenkins brought up about around gangs in schools. And this is actually the first time that I'm hearing about any issues that may have happened. So to me, it's concerning that I haven't heard anything about that before tonight.
Thank you so much, Trustee Kwan. Yeah, go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
Oh, no, I just wanted to clarify if there was a question there directed at me or not.
Yeah, Trustee Kwan, was there a direct question or just a comment?
As I said, it was actually more in response to what Mr. Jenkins had said. I was more curious about some of the comments he made, and if I don't feel like you have to answer. It was they can be rhetorical questions that I'm sure we can answer in some capacity at some point, but just some thoughts that come out of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Respond, or
yeah, Mark, if you have a response.
Yeah, sorry, I'm unclear what the board is aware of and is aware not, but I assure you that we have an emergency meeting on May 18th. It's a regional-wide emergency meeting of the 3 school boards, every police department, and RCMP. It is to address the very, very real issue of the organized crime and gangs that are coming from the mainland. They are in our schools. I know Saanich is very involved in it. I see Jody hand up. Maybe she can comment on it. This is factual. We have files that are underway. A lot of resources, a lot of money has been included in this. As far as being proactive, and again, going back to Matt Christie, saying that we need to be proactive. The reason so much of that information of what is happening, the assaults, the issues that are happening in our schools that are related to gangs are becoming from the information from the school liaison officers that are in there that have built those relationships and trust with students that have come forth to provide that information. Without those school liaison officers in those schools, specifically high school, although we are starting to see in the mainland infiltrating middle schools, but in the high schools here, that information would be lost if we did not have the trust of those police officers that are in the schools working and building those relationships. That is proactive. That is the information that's being provided to the police departments, Saanich and Victoria. That is the information that is keeping my children, as well as every other child in high school, safe. And it's not a perspective, that is actually a fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Lastly, I'm going to pass it over to Jody. Go ahead.
Thank you. So my sort of question was going to be directed back to Matt as well, and in retrospect to the proactive policing approach. I'm the school liaison officer for Saanich and have been for the last 3 years. I've worked very closely with several of the schools in the school district and can attest to the gang violence that has infiltrated the schools at this time. If it wasn't for our relationship building and all the relationships that we've developed within the community of the the schools. Our approach that we have taken to alleviate some of this gang violence that's occurring probably would never exist with respect to how we communicate with both the teachers, the staff, the school, and the students. So my question to Matt is, with the whole proactive approach, you know, the perspective right now is that we are proactive, we are in the schools, we are doing all these things. So if we are all going to come to the table at the same, for the exact same thing, I agree, the safety of the children, and it's a hot topic, but how are we going to be able to make these good decisions if the information that you are providing or not providing is inaccurate or without proper information? You talked about Victoria, since the school liaison programs have been down, that everything's been fine. I can tell you in my 3 years at Saanich as a school liaison program that I get called daily from Victoria schools because they're in need of a school liaison officer front since they've been gone. So where is your information coming? We worked with Victoria School District with international students last year, taking down the downtown core and all the information. If we didn't work collaboratively with the schools and with the police departments, that could have gone incredibly worse. So where is your information coming from? Because my fear is, in the meetings that I've been present with and the information that we are reading, there's a lot of inaccuracies, and I'm fearful that there are people who are making decisions that may not be for all the right reasons. And ultimately, we're all here to make sure our children are safe. We're the ones doing the jobs. We're the ones that are seeing it every day. We're the ones that are talking to the students and the teachers and the staff. And so when I'm the only school liaison officer that has been doing this for the last 3 years, and you're telling me that people are complaining and doing all these things when I haven't heard a thing from anybody, the relationship building is key. And the work that we are doing right now with the gang violence, I can tell you right now, is incredible, the relationship building that's going on. And my fear is if that doesn't continue, our children are no longer safe. And if we're gonna all come to the table together and work together, then you need to hear us as well. You need to hear what we're saying. We are not sitting here telling you falsities. Our children are not safe right now if you remove us from the schools.
Sorry, Jody, could you restate maybe what the question was, just so that it's clear for Matt?
My question is, where is he getting the information about the school liaison program everything being fine since the school liaison program left? And if he's going to talk about a proactive approach, is that not all of us coming to the table to work together to find a way to ensure that all children are safe in the community, which includes the police at the table?
Thanks, Jody. Go ahead, Matt.
Sure. I think that there's a couple of things going on within the conversation here, because I think, like, on one hand here, it's not schools' jobs to stop crime, right? It's our job to make sure students are safe, absolutely, but to help police doing their jobs, that, like, maybe at times, if it's necessary, I don't know, but that's not really what this discussion is about. Like, I think how police go about doing their jobs is a different discussion, right? That's for police to do. I wouldn't expect them to tell me how to teach. I don't expect for me to tell them how to police. But I think that the question of, like, creating proactive models, what we're really talking about is being able to, like, we know that a lot of crime and issues that do happen, or issues that come up in schools around behavior and stuff like that, a lot of it is students that do not have adequate supports for the services that they need, in terms of whether that's having a full-time EA with them or having counseling services, things like that. So when we're talking about proactive supports, we're talking about what are the things that are going to actually support students, because I think that that's the thing that schools are interested in. We're interested in the growth, well-being of students. We're interested in how do we support them and nourish them. And so those are the pieces. And, you know, there's part of the thing with this review that we have here, we have compiled tons and tons of information for you folks. there's more information out there. By no means is it exhaustive. I think it's really important to look through this, because this is not just like, oh, Matt woke up one day and was like, oh, this is a thing. You know, this is serious offices of, you know, BC Civil Liberties, the Human Rights Commissioner. There's reports from all across Canada that look at issues of systemic racism in policing, of these other issues of like profiling. This is about trying to address that to make schools safer for students. And I hope that it's very apparent to the trustees that whatever decision is made today, it's not just you make the decision and leave this. There's a lot of work that you're going to have to do. You're probably going to need to get another committee together to really look at what are the ways that we start to shift our thinking. But I think we're asking for a different approach to how we address safety in our schools and who are we prioritizing within that. So that's my thoughts on it. And it's not an easy decision for you folks, but I think there's a lot of information there for you folks to make an informed one that's based on evidence and what's best for students.
Sorry, Matt, I don't think you answered my question still about where the information came about the school liaison program and the schools being fine without the school liaison program. You said that you have evidence, that you've got information. So where's the evidence? Because we can pull our stats and show you what's happened in the last several years.
If I could interrupt for a moment. I do think that Trustee Duncan has something to say right now. So I'm going to pass it over to her just for a moment.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to remind folks that so the committee, we do have an agenda item on our agenda tonight, and it is to receive the report from the committee. And I just want to make clear that the documents received by the committee are included in the report. Police were invited to participate in that committee. And ultimately, it is up to the board to decide how we want to proceed. So I just want to reiterate that, you know, I think it's great to ask presenters if they wish to answer questions, you know, then great. But I just want to caution us that we don't move into debate or ask presenters to speak to issues that are really for the board to speak to. If the board has concerns about the work of the committee, then the board will raise those concerns and seek additional clarification. But we're not there yet. The board is tonight just receiving the report and then deciding how it wishes to proceed. So I just wanted to clarify process-wise that when presenters are presenting, we're not debating. We are hearing presentations, and then when we get to the agenda item, there'll be an opportunity for some discussion. And also wanted to clarify who the decision makers are in this case, and it is the board, not individual members of the committee.
Thank you very much, Trustee Duncan, for that reminder and clarification. With that, I think I'd like to move us forward to the next speaker, as we've spent quite a lot of time on this agenda item. So I'm going to be passing it over to Kelly Craft for her presentation. And just a reminder that you have 5 minutes for the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, trustees. My name is Kelly Craft. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a queer secondary teacher in the Victoria School District. My colleague Matt Christie, he just discussed the research around minority groups' experience of policing, but I'd like to focus on the goals of the SPLO program that are listed itself and the plea from the Human Rights Commissioner as presented in the documents before you. 3 years ago, I presented my concerns to the SPLO committee, and this past year I had the opportunity to sit on the committee as a GVTA representative. I personally have many stories about negative police interactions with youth, from being unnecessarily and aggressively physical with a student experiencing a mental health emergency, to police officers who hosted the Youth for Change and Inclusion Camp, expressing their support for corporal punishment against so-called unruly students, and sharing their upsetting and prejudiced views against Indigenous people. However, the point of this committee is that we cannot rely on anecdotal evidence to support our opinions regarding this issue, as it's not accurate to refer to the experiences of one or two people to represent the whole. As you'll learn through your reading of the documents before you, there's not adequate research on the matter of SPLOs in our schools in Victoria, let alone BC. The survey that was conducted in our district wasn't expansive or inclusive enough of enough voices to be representative of our community. However, what is clear is that there are many students, staff, and parents who experience discomfort and fear in the presence of police officers. And it would be shameful if we as a community were happy to put the comfort and safety of even a handful of students at risk for the sake of a program whose roles and actions are unstandardized and unnecessary in the presence of more educated, experienced, and specialized professionals. The BC Human Rights Commissioner has said that it is incumbent upon you to produce evidence, independent evidence of a need for SPLOs that cannot be met through civilian alternatives. I'd like to address the SPLO program goals here to highlight that they can and should be replaced. The first was relationship building, which was mentioned in this meeting as well. I would argue that most adults do not have a relationship with police in their community. If they're in a minority group, it's likely that they've been taught by their families or communities how to interact safely with police in order to avoid violence or escalation. As well, police officers are not required to undergo cultural sensitivity training or trauma-informed practice training, which makes them ill-equipped to build relationships with marginalized youth. Infrequent relationship building will not undo the significant and relevant fears of minority groups based on historically poor treatment. And I would argue that this goal is one that serves the police force and not our school and district goals. The second goal was violent risk assessment. If a student is posing a violent threat within a school, the solution should not be to threaten them with police if we were to move away from the oppressive history of policing within and outside of our schools. The goal of our educational environments is to see our students for who they are and understand that behavior is communication. Involving a police officer inherently escalates the tension in a violent threat situation in a way that's unnecessary in a school. We have professionals within our district that are better suited, better equipped, and better educated to deal with this type of issue. The next goal was to support schools during the aftermath of critical or traumatizing incidents. Police officers are not trained in psychology, counseling, or adequate de-escalation. There are mental health professionals already in our schools who have strong relationships with their students, and those are the adults that our students are most comfortable with and most trusting of. It's unnecessary to bring in armed police to deal with the aftermath of a traumatic event. In fact, the school district itself called up school counselors when a grade 8 student passed away a few years ago. Already, police officers are not the first choice of the district when responding to trauma, nor should they be. The next goal is to act as guest speakers in subject-specific classes, for example, Law 12. However, police officers are given 44 weeks of training total. As far as the VicBD site lists, there are 6 to 8 weeks dedicated to learning the law. There are professionals who are far more familiar with and therefore more qualified to speak about the law in detail. Lawyers, for example, require 4 to 6 years of training specifically about the law, so they would be more knowledgeable in a class like Law 12. A final goal is to provide class discussions on issues such as substance use, consent, bullying, etc. However, research has shown that students learn better when they feel safe and supported. They're more likely to learn from a person that they know and trust rather than an outside force. Teachers spend months building relationships with their students, and counselors have years of training learning how to broach sensitive issues. These should be the adults that are entrusted to teach our students about tough subjects, especially as they're already entrusted to teach them similar ideas through their curriculum. As a teacher who works with students from all equity-seeking groups, and as a person from an equity-seeking group myself, I know firsthand what my own students think about police officers in schools. But again, this isn't what matters. What matters is that there isn't clear research to back up the efficacy or purpose of police liaison officers in our schools. Without a research defense of this program in our district and our province, it is neglectful, if not outright harmful, to continue this program when, as our own district conducted survey showed, a large proportion of students feel unsafe in the presence of police. As the Human Rights Commissioner said, it is incumbent upon you to produce independent evidence of a need for SPLOs that cannot be met through civilian alternatives, as I've just listed. And I believe it's clear that we do not have that independent evidence. I thank you for the time that you're taking to read through the entirety of the documents provided. And I hope that you will come to the same conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Kelly. Do you feel comfortable taking questions?
I would prefer to not, as I feel as though the folks who signed up for to speak on the speakers list, I don't feel it is my role to answer questions.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, I muted myself in the middle of speaking. I wanted to ask if there were any comments from trustees. I see Trustee Duncan's hand.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to also thank Kelly for being here and for participating on the committee and taking part in the work. It is appreciated.
And with that, I'd like to move us to B4. Cole Brewer has a presentation. Again, a reminder that the presentations are limited to 5 minutes. Go ahead, Cole.
Hello, everybody. Why Hasselhoff, why Pisnaxilu, Isquiskanist, Inil New Skip Brewer, Iskansiok, Iskansimilkami, Limlin. Hello, good day. Welcome, everyone. My name is Cole Brewer. My traditional name is Skanist, which translates as Black Bear. My father is Skip Brewer. I'm from the Okanagan Nation, Similkameen Indian Band. I'm currently a police officer with the West Shore RCMP, working in our Indigenous policing unit and assigned as the community liaison for the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, a position I've held for several years. I think of bringing a unique lens and opinion to this discussion, being A, an Indigenous person, B, a police officer, 3, a school resource officer at 3 SD61 schools, and a parent of 4 children in the school system. The role of our Indigenous policing units is to provide enhanced policing services, focusing on delivering culturally sensitive policing and improving police community relations. We have sat down with chief and council for both our communities and developed letters of expectations which guide how we deliver policing in these 2 communities. Both Songhees and Esquimalt nations have identified police engagement with youth as a priority within their letter of expectation with the police, with objectives to provide preventative programs for youth and promote positive relationships between the community and the police. Songhees' letter of expectation specifically requests a commitment to improve the level of community policing by increasing the RCMP's profile and presence in schools and at community functions. Esquimalt's letter of expectation requests to develop trust with youth and create a positive impression of the RCMP by meeting them in educational and social settings. We currently deliver the DARE program at View Royal and Craigflower Elementary at the request of Songhees and Esquimalt nations, as well as educators, administrators, and parents at these schools. Last Thursday, 50 students from Craigflower Elementary graduated the DARE program. Approximately 75% of those students were Indigenous. Leadership from both communities attended that grad. Esquimalt Chief Rob Thomas stated that it was important for the community youth to see leadership there to show the value and importance of what those students learned. Songhees elected Councillor Maggie Charlie commented on the moving words of the youth who spoke at that grad and the positive impact the program had on them. The priority of students in schools is education and learning. And as a parent of 4 school-age children, that's what I want for my children. However, I feel the need to provide clarity on what we do here in SD61 as SROs. The information presented in the studies and models in the previous minutes in the package that is being referred to by Matt tended to represent programs in large cities like Toronto, Vancouver, or in the United States, with an officer assigned full-time to a single high school, which seemed to paint a picture of an SRO hovering around youth, impeding their education and possibly even intimidating students. That's not the model we employ here in SD61. An SRO is typically assigned to a family of schools, i.e. a high school, then the middle schools that feed into that high school, then the elementary schools that feed into those middle schools. It's done for familiarity, consistency, and to aid in maintaining established relationships with those youth. In elementary school, SROs are helping build young people with resiliency skills, healthy support networks, and trust. Community helpers like the police sometimes assist and deliver simple short lessons such as general safety talks, stranger safety, Halloween safety, bike safety, anti-bullying, etc. In middle school, the academic workloads and responsibilities increase, and SRO involvement is typically dialed back, mostly to participation in extracurricular activities such as holidays, special events, and sports, which are utilized as a simple way to maintain those relationships without disrupting learning. In high school, this trend continues with little organized SRO involvement, unless it is a topic that we as police can speak to, such as a discussion on the Charter of Rights and how it applies specifically to policing, or again, engagement in holidays, special events, sports to maintain those established relationships. SROs are sometimes asked to assist school administration with conversations pertaining to incidents where the WISE Youth Criminal Justice Act may apply to youth 12 to 17. The involvement of SROs is not mandatory. Parents are contacted prior to speaking to those youth, Options are given to give consent, be present, or to say no, they don't want it. Those are all presented. Most of these issues are dealt with via the School Act in a conversation about the law from an educational lens. This is not a scared straight type of tactic. Lastly, I want to speak about systemic racism. Systemic racism does exist in the justice system, but exists in many other areas as well. It exists in employment, social participation, and you're foolish to believe that it doesn't exist in the education system. Go to the school, look at any staff photo. You'll see a lot of white faces standing back at you. So how do we address it? We acknowledge it, we don't hide from it or deny it, and accept that it exists. We educate ourselves. We have to learn on how and why this happened and how it impacts people. And we have to continue this dialogue, keep talking about it, have meaningful conversations so we can learn, grow, move forward, and do better. If there are fears or triggered associated with the SRR program, removing the program will not solve the issue. Is ending a relationship a path to a positive relationship? I put that to you. So thank you very much. I'm speaking quick, but thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Cole. Do you feel comfortable taking questions and comments?
Sure.
All right, so in that case, I already see Trustee Duncan's hand up, so I'll pass it over to her.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to vocalize my appreciation to Mr. Brewer for being here tonight and sharing your experience and your unique perspective with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'm not seeing any other hands at the moment, so I'm going to move us over to the sorry, the new item added to our agenda, B5. So I'm going to be passing it over to Ryan Bro. Go ahead.
Thank you. Members of the board, everyone, hello. My name's Ryan, he, him pronouns. I'm a teacher on call in SD61. And I'd be speaking tonight in favor of discontinuing and abolishing the police liaison programs in Victoria schools. So it's been said, but the 5 minutes allotted here is really not nearly enough to cover the range of issues and concerns surrounding SPLO programs coming from students, community, teachers. I am thankful to those presenters demonstrating with thoughtfulness and compassion and impeccable research the reasons that this program should be discontinued. But for my part, I would like to address why I think this program should be discontinued on the grounds of workplace safety and pedagogy. So rightly so, the bulk of what we've discussed has been in regards to the relationship, harms or benefits to student experience and safety with police in schools. And I also want to emphasize this, but before I do, I'd like to draw attention to the position of teachers and staff and their interactions and relationships with police in schools. So as has already been stated by Matt, deciding whether or not this program should continue is not really something that should be based on majority opinion or lack of opinion itself, given that large swathes of the people, students and community members responding to the various surveys that have been put out reported no interaction with SPLOs. Rather, the voices of those with concerns and experiences of harm, harassment, violence, and discomfort need to be the ones centered here. This includes teachers. Continuing this program, and indeed if the recommendations as I understand them in the report are followed, advocating for the expansion of this program to schools that do not currently have an SPLO, it is tantamount to enforcing work conditions that are at the least constantly uncomfortable, stressful, frightening for teachers, and at the worst actively harmful with the risk of violence, surveillance, and police discipline. The very presence of police in schools is in this way a bit of an attack on teacher and staff rights within their workplace, particularly as they are documented amongst teachers and staff and their own stories, creating that feeling of an unsafe work environment, one that disproportionately impacts Indigenous teachers, teachers of color, LGBTQ+ teachers, but teachers are together and any injury to one is done to all of us. I'd also like to say that there is a bit of a hidden curriculum to the presence of SPLOs in schools. It can be hard to see, but I think when it's thought about and revealed, it's pretty hard to miss. Policing eats up about a quarter of the city budget, 2.5 times more than the next highest item. Increasing and advocating for SPLOs in all schools, as the committee recommendations state, would mean that more money is likely to be taken away from other meaningful social infrastructure in this city and for these students towards policing. This and the addition of police in schools is a kind of teaching. The SPL program claims to be about building, repairing good relationships between students and the police. It wants students to trust police officers as they are adults and to be favorably disposed to law enforcement in their adult lives. But none of this looks at why people might not be so disposed towards law enforcement. And it assumes that if they do not trust police, then it's their own failing, rather than coming from law enforcement functioning as intended. It implicitly disregards any and all of the experiences of violence and harassment lived by people dealing with over-policing. It asks students and teachers to trust policing without giving anything in terms of rectifying the long history of injustice done by police in Canada, a long ongoing history of injustice that I must stress is not incidental, but is entirely in keeping with the purposes of police, not just the RCMP, in the ongoing efforts of colonization. To be clear, this is entirely regardless of the individual merits or aims of individual police officers. It is a function of the institution. It is nothing really short of gaslighting to try and build ill-defined good relationships with police and schools when that will change nothing about the way policing disproportionately targets Indigenous students, students of color, LGBTQ plus students throughout their lives. We owe students more than that. Far from irresponsible, the GVTA, BCTF, and BC Commissioner for Human Rights positions on these are the ones trying to give students more. By retaining these programs, you would be sending a message that students and teachers cannot be trusted and that police are necessary to manage them. And in Chief Delmanek's own words, it would be to bring students back in line. By retaining these programs, you'd be telling students not to think critically about the way our society is run, telling them there is no alternative. It tells them they ought not dream of a world without police violence, but should accustom themselves to it. That they cannot build something new where injustices are righted at the root and restoration and reparation take over from punishment. You would be foreclosing on their autonomy, their creativity, their love by making the school a place of policing. It says to them they cannot expect more from the world, that they cannot change the world. You would be telling them not to care, to give up. And I hope you don't want to teach kids that lesson. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Ryan. I'm wondering, are you comfortable taking questions?
I'd prefer not to tonight. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Are there any comments from trustees before we move on? Go ahead, Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, I just also wanted to extend my thank you to Mr. Bro for being here and sharing his perspective.
I also saw Trustee Bayo's hand.
I was also just going to thank Ryan for speaking with us, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much. So with that, I'm going to move us on to new business. So I'm going to pass it over to Deputy Superintendent Caldwell for the FESL memo and presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and through the chair. Tonight we have district principals Sean McCartney and David Hovis presenting to the committee on our priority students and the district goal to support those priority students. You will have seen over the last several months up until this point that each of these presentations looked back at how we are connected to the ministry, how we're connected to our strategic plan, how we're connected to the framework for enhancing student learning, and how we're connected to the district as a whole. So there is a memo in the packet provided to support this presentation, and I will turn it over to Sean and David to begin their presentation. Thank you.
And I'm just going to check with Andy. Good evening, everyone. Andy, am I good to share my own slides, or are you driving?
You should be shown whichever's easiest with you.
Okay, I'll try to drive from here. As I say that, maybe I'll get you to do it.
Yeah, one moment.
Thanks. Good evening, folks. I'll jump in while Andy organizes the slides. As Harold just alluded to, David Hovis and I are here tonight to share a few examples of work related to the district team goal. this is the first slide that basically we can skip over once we're live. And as Harold mentioned, we're not going to read the contents of the memo, but there's some accompanying details and a further summary in the memo. And we're good to click to the next slide there, Andy.
Thank you.
All right. Well, as you saw on the title slide very briefly there, and you've probably heard many times over various ed policy presentations this year, the district team goal references priority students. This goal is an attempt to prioritize students who may not have equity of access and opportunity. I think that's a bit of a flavor of the conversation tonight. Priority students can include students of Indigenous ancestry, students with disabilities and diverse abilities, students in care, refugee students, to name a few. However, as we discuss how we define and identify priority students, we know it's not as simple as focusing on any one trait or an identifier. Rather, as we discuss this, we know we can use some of that data to identify students whose stories and experiences we need to surface in a greater way. In essence, our goal is about supporting school teams to try to better understand and respond to the voices of students and families we serve. So that's kind of a nutshell around the goal statement, how it came to be, and how we think about defining and identifying what we refer to as priority students. Next slide, please, Andy. The goal statement also relates to the ministry vision for student success. And as Harold said, this has been a theme throughout the ed policy presentations. Specifically, the quadrant around student-centered learning. To quote from the ministry vision for student success, we believe this is about enabling the most flexibility as possible to organize and deliver programs within schools, which becomes increasingly important as we take a more inclusive approach to education, trying to ensure all students, regardless of ability or background, benefit from a learning environment tailored to maximize their potential. And again, the theme of zeroing in on the student voice, the student experience, and our belief to continue to strive for student-centered learning. Next slide, please, Andy. As referenced in the memo, our goal also connects to aspects that are summarized in the FESL 2022 report. And I won't read too much there, but we've referenced specifically in the FESL report, pages 22 to 24 related to educational outcome 3 and some of the specific support strategies. For example, our work around culturally responsive systems and including more voices in the district data set. That's one of the named sub-strategies there. And finally, increasing the number of students who indicate they feel school is a place where they belong. Also, under goal 3 of the strat plan, we have a couple of specific examples listed in the FESL 2022 report that I'll elaborate on a bit briefly here. One of those examples relates to our support for children and youth in care. We now have a fully implemented standard of practice, including personalized plans for each student in care. And that is an established piece of infrastructure that has been developed over the last year and a bit. And also members of the district team, as well as Indigenous Education Department, have established some regular meeting structures with MCFD and Indigenous delegated agencies to strive to improve our shared services and enhance networking and collaboration between schools and our community partners. So these are just a couple of pieces of how the district team goal and some of the actions have aligned under the FESL report and the strat plan. Next slide, please, Andy. And as stated in the memo, and pretty much for the rest of this presentation, David and I will focus on just a few examples of work related to the goal. This first slide that I'll speak to before handing it over to David is an update on the district support referrals. So trustee is new to the board. In the past year and a bit, we have really worked hard to streamline this piece of infrastructure as kind of a digital tool that has helped us better deliver on efficient, effective, and equitable services for all schools. And so through this district referral process, school teams reach out to us, our small district team here, to basically look for collaborative problem solving and supports as it relates to a whole range of things. This year, our support referrals are increased year over year. We've had 206 referrals from schools to date this year, which already surpasses the total from last year in 2021, 2022. The impact of the goal statement on the district support referrals has resulted in kind of a more increased focused use of what we call person-centered planning. So when you see that graphic on the right with kind of the overview of a fairly highly visual process, in fact, I think there used to be something in the boardroom with a picture of a facilitated path session that previous group of trustees went through, engaged in the strategic planning process. It's a tool that is used with student support planning. It's called Planning Alternative Tomorrows with Hope. And we've actually funded and supported some training for all of our secondary school-based team colleagues, as well as district team members. And it's a really powerful planning tool that, puts a much more personalized and positive spin on surfacing family and student voice and members of the home team who partner and support our kiddos outside of the school setting. This has been a strategy targeted for use, especially at secondary with these referrals. And we've seen significant kind of anecdotal and street data validating that we're on the right direction to really zeroing in on the power of student voice and the student learning experience. Additionally, under the district support referrals at secondary school, about 20% of the total referrals are what we call a request for a district-based team meeting. These are, again, collaborative problem-solving meetings that sometimes result in a student moving by choice or by need to alternative programming options at SJ Burnside. And so one of the other highlights that's referenced in the memo that I'll hand over to David to speak to now is to talk a little bit more about SJ Burnside and those alternative options in our district. Next slide, and over to you, David.
Thanks, Sean. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Thumbs up. Thanks, Tom. School District 61's alternative education program serves students who benefit from the opportunities provided within an alternative learning environment. Classes at SJ Burnside, or SJB as we know it, are structured yet flexible, and they are often offered through both active class and self-paced online formats. Courses span grades 9 to 12 and serve a population of students ranging from 13 to 19 years of age. Through teamwork and commitment, they provide wraparound service to support students' academic, social, physical, and emotional needs. Next slide, Andy. Thanks. The following includes some of the educational programs SJB is proud to offer. The first one is Access. Students placed in the Access program often have more complex learning or social emotional needs. Headed by a special education teacher, Access is a quiet, safe, and supportive contained classroom environment, which allows students to work on self-paced materials at their level. When a student feels ready, they can choose to have Access as a home base while also integrating in other classes. Next program is Junior Academics. Features a team teaching environment and supported by an EA. The goal of Junior Academics program is to have students who join in grades 8, 9, and 10 work on strengthening their basic literacy and numeracy skills in preparation for their academic courses required for graduation. Students are in an active class environment that receive individualized support with a focus on core competencies to help fill in any academic gaps. And then the final program I'm going to share is the Link at Lambert. The Link is a satellite alternative program housed at Lambert Park Secondary, which offers a blended learning option. Students at Link at Lambrick choose either a morning or afternoon schedule and work collaboratively with the support of a teacher coordinator, EA, learning support teacher, and an on-site YFC. Courses are designed to provide students with a self-paced flexibility. However, students work with their staff to set goals towards making progress in their coursework and work steadily at their own pace. Students also have the opportunity to participate in elective courses and extracurricular activities offered at Lambrick Park Secondary. This format often works well for students with the goal of eventually being back in a neighborhood school. Next slide, please. As Sean noted, priority learners can include refugee and new immigrant students. In a response to growing need, School District 61's Welcome and Learning Center was established this past fall. It's the first welcoming and learning center in a school district on Vancouver Island. Since September, we have supported over 100 students and their families as they arrive in our school district. Next slide, please. Its purpose is to eliminate some of the barriers new immigrant and refugee families experience by assisting them through the registration process, offering a transitional classroom opportunity prior to entering their neighborhood school, making connections with community partners, and providing ongoing support to students, staff, and parents in schools. Next slide, please. The Welcome and Learning Classroom is located here at the school board office and is taught by our district multilingual learning teacher. It's been pretty exciting this year to have students here at Tolme. It's a place for all students ranging in ages from kindergarten to grade 12, as many students attend with their siblings. Its focus is on connection, belonging, and learning through a trauma-informed lens. Some students stay for a few days, some stay for a number of months prior to attending their neighborhood school. Recently, we had the privilege of welcoming one newcomer family where their son at age 15 had not attended school before due to circumstances out of their control. When meeting with the student, his mother and brother during the registration process, they all cheered at hearing he could start at the Welcome Center the next day. As he settled in, it was evident he possessed many strengths and was eager to engage in his new learning environment. Working with a fantastic team of educators, he has now made the successful transition to high school and continues to receive the supports that he needs. Next slide, please. As a school district, we recognize the important role community organizations such as the ones listed here play in also supporting youth and their families. We have seen an increase in the number of newcomers to our community, and a strong relationship with these agencies supports students' overall success. Another story I've been given the permission to share this evening demonstrates the importance of collective advocacy. Arriving in Canada without his immediate family, a young Ukrainian student registered at the Welcome Center with the support of his temporary guardians. Shortly after beginning his studies, his living situation abruptly changed, and he was left with the choice of either returning to Ukraine or finding alternative housing. In connecting with his family via Zoom back in Ukraine, it was apparent he couldn't return to his war-torn country. Reaching out to Help Ukraine Vancouver Island, one of the organizations listed there, the school team worked to assist him with a new homestay family, and most importantly, the opportunity to stay here safely. He continues to thrive in his studies at the school, works part-time, and is involved in community sports. Next slide, please. This past year, we partnered with the University of Victoria and several other community organizations to form the Research and Community Advisory Board. A 4-month-long research project was conducted at one of our high schools to garner refugee newcomer youth, parents, and school support staff's perceptions of trauma, its effects, recommendations on interventions, and disparities in accessing services. Looking to the next steps, we are exploring how a district welcome center can assist in addressing some of these challenges faced by newcomers and how to best support this work in our schools. Next slide. In conclusion, we hope you have seen and heard from a few examples this evening our goal, which is to support school teams in identifying priority students, surfacing their stories, and closing the equity gap. And that's the end of our presentation. Are there any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. Yeah, we'll open up the floor for questions now. Does anybody have, oh, absolutely. Yeah, Tracy, go ahead.
I finally made it back. I
Yay.
have been struggling so much, and I'm sorry that I missed so much of the meeting. And I feel like this question might be because I missed something from Sean's piece, but I'm curious about how students, I mean, it was a great presentation, the piece that I saw and the bits that I read previously. I'm always very personally interested in how priority students are handled in the district. And it's very hopeful to see some of these great programs. I'm curious about how students sort of are streamed into accessing them, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can briefly reiterate, there's an aspect of our referral process that again was designed to attempt to have greater equity. It's available for school staff, but when I was talking about, for example, secondary students accessing alternative programs at SJB, it's by choice and or by need. And I think that's been, there's been an increased focus on the sense of choice and voice, especially from parents and kids who at times are looking for different options. But the process itself is pretty consistent, where it flows through school teams and school administrators who then use our referral app to follow a process. Hope that
right.
does
And I'm
clarify.
sure that's the piece I probably missed at the beginning. Yeah. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, and I was just, if it's okay if I say one more thing, I just was, there's two things to this, which is, I do hear from families who are very interested in those options and they don't necessarily know that they exist in the district. And so that's always a something I wonder about, is how that is communicated, because if it's coming through staff, how are families made aware, or are they made aware that these are options, or are they really full programs that we're concerned about, not filling up too much? I do really like, obviously the choice of voice. It's really, really important that students want to be in the spaces that they're in at the end. And I especially like the, the access program, where there's the potential to kind of flow with comfort into other parts of the school community and keeping that whole school community focus. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I also see Trustee Kwan's hand, so I'll pass it over to her.
Thank you. Mine is actually in specifically to just want to say thank you to Deputy Superintendent Caldwell for the memo. Lots of really great information in there. And I actually I pulled a couple things, and I think this might be just because it was before my time and I may not be reading the right documents, but with specific reference to the 2022 FESL report and the pages in there, I think there was reference to the ministry's vision of student success and guiding principles of student-centered learning, and then also children and youth in care standard of practice. And I didn't see those in the report that I was reading that I got from the website. So I just wondered if there was a possibility of maybe just at some point getting a link or something to where exactly I could read that.
I can jump in and speak. Perhaps it was the direct page reference. So there's a very brief reference to the the district children and youth in care standard of practice on page 4, which was just listed as one of the district successes under goal 3. There's nothing in the FESL report that elaborates on some of the details of what that is, but if trustees wanted, we can walk away and prepare a little bit more detail around elaborating on what exactly that means.
Great, thanks so much, Sean. I also see Trustee Duncan's hand, so I'll pass it over to her.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, and thanks to Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Hovis, and Mr. McCartney for all your work on the report. certainly some real success to celebrate. Not least the children and youth standard of practice and the successful implementation of that standard. That is very, very welcome. And I know I'm hearing good things about all of the work that we're doing to support new families, refugee families, and others, vulnerable students who are coming and seeking services, partly through the new center at the board office. So congratulations to you all on that work. I wanted to just kind of delve in a little bit to some of the referrals, if I may. So thank you. I note that we have, some data on the number of referrals that we've seen to date, specifically up to the 25th of April. And I believe we're noting that we're seeing an increase in referrals, I believe, as compared to 2021-22. I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit more context on how many referrals have been addressed and how many are outstanding, or whether you're still, finding that we have a backlog of referrals and that we're how we are doing, I guess, in terms of addressing some of those some of the challenges around going through that kind of volume of referrals. And then I just have one more question after that, if I may, Chair.
Yeah, I'll attempt a brief response because I think there's a lot behind unpacking referrals. I think in addition to district collaborative support referrals, which is the 206 referenced in the memo, we also have a referral process for our psychologist services, our SLP services, et cetera. That's not contained in the 206. Every referral we receive is processed and dealt with, and we have found a way to keep up with that demand. So the active referrals that we receive have all had action. Speaking specifically to the 206, we vet referrals 2 to 3 times per week, and there's usually no more than 3 working or school days between a referral coming in and some type of response, whether that's a phone call, an email, or just it being assigned to a team member to follow up. So that's kind of the timeliness of the support responses, and most of them come with a sense of, please help, call as soon as you can, along with those requests. So yeah, despite kind of having a bit of a smaller team this year and moving forward, we continue to see an increasing demand for the supports and services from our small but mighty team.
Excellent. Thanks so much for answering all of those questions. And with that, I see Trustee Duncan's hand one more time, so I'll pass it back over.
Yeah, thanks. I just had one more question, if I may, and this is just related back. First of all, thanks so much, Sean, for giving a bit of context. I'm always interested to hear also sort of how we're using systems in order to help us manage those types of workloads. So I appreciate that there's multiple streams of referrals in different ways, and I'm glad that you were able to clarify the 206 and what kind of referrals that you're speaking to. The other question I had was really around alternative education, and really wanting to get a better sense of how many students in alternative ed are graduating with adult dogwoods. So I'm wondering if we are collecting data or have a sense of how many students that go into those alternative programs graduate with an adult dogwood. In particular, certain high priority students. I'm wondering if we have that data available in relation to some of our high priority students.
I can quickly say that off the top of my head, we don't, but I also see Deputy Superintendent Caldwell's got his finger raised.
Through the chair.
Go
yes,
ahead, yeah.
We do collect the data. It would take us some time to bring that data back to you to share it with you.
Thank you very much. That's appreciated.
Alrighty, thank you very much, Deputy Superintendent. If there are no further questions, I'd like to pass it over to Secretary. Oh, I see Tracy's hand. I see Tracy's hand. Go ahead.
It's really quick. It's just to add on to that, that I think that's a great question, but I'd also be interested in the evergreens additionally, if you're going to pull it together, if that's okay for me to put in my own suggestion to the board.
Go ahead, Deputy Superintendent.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a clarification there, Tracy, please. For the district or SJ Burnside?
I think, I think that's what Nicole was Trustee Duncan was asking, was for SJ Burnside, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I was interested in that. And I know it might be a really small number, so hard to make public, but it might be good to share with the board at least.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Excellent. Okay, so now we can move on to item C2 of the agenda, Policy Subcommittee. I'm going to pass it over to Secretary Treasurer Stride.
Thank you, Chair. Included in the agenda package is a report from the Policy Subcommittee. The committee has met twice in April 13th and April 25th. On April 13th, it met to prioritize some new policy direction that was received by the board. And at the April 25th meeting, the committee met to review a new sanctuary schools policy. And there's one recommendation coming to the board through the Ed Policy Committee, and that is a draft sanctuary schools policy, which is included in the agenda package. I was not in attendance at that meeting, so I'll probably pass it over to the Policy Subcommittee Chair in the event that there are any questions that come up regarding the draft.
Seeing as Trustee Duncan is the chair of that subcommittee, I'll pass it over to her.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks to the Secretary Treasurer. Yeah, so essentially, and I guess first of all, I want to acknowledge the work of Trustee Mabobi and Superintendent Whitten on this policy. They certainly were, in addition to the folks that very kindly submitted the policy proposal, Trustee Mabobi and Superintendent Whitten were very much the drivers behind bringing this policy recommendation together. So thank you to you both for your work. So yeah, essentially, we really wanted to bring it to Education Policy and Directions to get some feedback from the board and from stakeholders and any rights holders who may be here this evening about the direction that we've moved in. If there's any other changes that you want to see. We were also quite keen to get some feedback on whether or not folks think that a further consultation is needed, other than, of course, the opportunity at this standing committee, and then again at the board for stakeholders and rights holders to feed in. So those are the sort of two things that we were hoping to achieve this evening.
Go ahead, Trustee Kwan.
Thank you. Yeah, if I was going to speak to further consultation, what I might suggest is that it gets sent to stakeholders and rights holders, so at least they have a chance to take a look at it, and maybe when we are as a board deciding to put it into practice, that might be a chance, if they've had a chance to read through it, to be able to come to the board meeting and speak to it. And if I may take a liberty and just ask a question as well, Chair. Yeah, okay. I understand that there may be regulations coming underneath the policy, and wondered if perhaps you, Trustee Duncan, could just outline what that would look like. I would assume we would have to have the policy in place before that happened, but just wondered if you could give a little outline on how that would work and how that would come about.
Yeah, through the chair, yeah, happy to answer that. So yes, the idea would be to have a regulation, and in fact, Superintendent Whitten is currently working on that. And so the expectation would be that depending on what happens with the policy tonight and whether there's any changes or amendments to that, then at some point after the policy is approved, a regulation would come before the committee as well for review. So that is certainly what we are expecting to happen. So really tonight we were hoping that if there's any changes to the policy that we could hear those this evening, and then just sort of going off of your suggestion, Trustee Kwan, we could take the added step of not just including the policy recommendation in the board pack up if the board does decide to move this or recommend that the board look at it. We could also then send a separate email to everyone just highlighting it so that it doesn't get lost in the pack up. That might be one way to kind of seek that additional feedback by the board meeting from stakeholders and any rights holders that attend.
Thanks very much, Trustee Duncan. I'm wondering if there are any further questions for Trustee Duncan. Go ahead, Trustee Gagnon.
Thank you, Chair. I was just curious about the 2.0 definitions element of the policy and whether there was any intention there to include future definitions, or if there was an ask on behalf of the policy subcommittee to maybe fill in spots there. Just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, that's a good question. Definitions didn't come up when we were discussing the draft. That could be something that certainly we take away to look at whether or not there's anything else that would be prudent to define. Wonder if any other members of the committee, in particular Superintendent Whitten, I know may also have a view on that.
Thank you. And through the chair, just as I look at this, the one definition that we may want to, or the board may wish to consider putting in there, is ordinarily resident. I find that sometimes that is a tough one to define, or people, it would be helpful if that is listed, but other feedback on other words to define would be most welcome.
I also see Lena's hand, so I'll pass it over to you for a question.
Hi, I just have a quick question under the 4.0 responsibilities. 4.1, the Board of Education will provide orientation and training for all staff regarding this policy and in order to promote culturally responsive knowledge. I was just wondering if we've thought about what that orientation and training might look like and how that might be implemented.
Through the chair, may I respond?
Yes, please.
Oh, thank you. So there's a few things that we have done previously with policies and regulations. One is that we bring these forward to the meeting we have with vice principals and principals in August, so that district leadership meeting. We also, with other policies and regs, such as the duty to report, those come through the first staff meeting in September. And we had this year an administrative assistant startup meeting, so this would come there as well. Predominantly in registering students, this would be the piece around administrative assistant that would need to know this policy and regulation. So I think there's many layers to providing training on this, and there's also our ongoing work around culturally responsive learning environments. So that's probably woven throughout most of our professional development.
Thank you, Superintendent. Lena, did you have a second question? I still see your hand up.
No, I didn't. I'm just slow on my response here. Thank you.
No worries. I'll pass it over to Trustee Painter.
Thank you, Chair, through you to Policy Committee. My question was about whether or not other school districts' models were used or were considered in the development of this policy, and if there's any any lessons learned from those districts regarding how this policy, that led to this policy being structured in the way that it is.
You're the chair, probably the superintendent's best place to speak to that because it was the superintendent that undertook that assessment.
Yes, Superintendent, if you could respond.
I can, sure. Thank you, Trustee Painter. Yes, we did refer to 4 other school districts that have policies around sanctuary schools, and many of them have very similar language. This one is from one specific district that we borrowed much of the policy. And also I have had some conversations with other districts who have this in place just to sort of glean if they have had specific challenges. Some have had this in place for several years and some have this as a somewhat new piece, but I really do think it's contextual based on the environment in the school district in the city that we're in.
Thanks for that clarification, Superintendent. So I'm not seeing any more hands. And so I'd like to move us forward to the next agenda item. But before we do so, I see Trustee Duncan's hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify next steps, if I might, Chair. So in addition to adding a definition for ordinarily residents, and obviously using the definition provided in the School Act, I wondered whether there was any other advice from the committee, or once that definition is added, if the committee would like this policy to come before the board at the May board meeting, taking account of Trustee Kwan's recommendation that we send the policy to stakeholders and to rights holders in advance of the board meeting, and invite them to bring any feedback to the board meeting.
I am hearing no feedback at the moment.
Okay, so I'm wondering if we need a motion, I guess is really what I'm saying. Just, referring the draft policy or with the recommendation for adding ordinarily residents to the policy to the Board of Education in May.
Did you want to move that motion?
I'm happy to move that motion.
Okay, and I see Trustee Bio seconds the motion. So now we have our discussion.
Yeah, and if I may, I think certainly the Superintendent Whitten has done due diligence on behalf of the committee in reviewing other school districts' approach to drafting this kind of policy. We have the added benefit of having a policy proposal submitted through Ed Policy as well. And I think at this time, it's might be prudent for us to prioritize moving this forward, given the effect on, or the immediate effect that it could have on students. Appreciate the suggestions of the committee around adding that definition and the added opportunity to provide feedback by highlighting the draft policy with stakeholders and rights holders in advance of the board meeting. So yeah, so I hope folks agree that that would be prudent.
I see Superintendent's hand.
Thank you. Just one addition, if I may. While we send it to rights holders and stakeholders, I'd also like to request staff to look at it, just again to make sure that it aligns with what we need to do with the registration process, so that we're not only following this draft policy or the policy that it becomes, but also the ministry guidelines of registration. So that it hasn't yet seen or had feedback from all of the staff.
Trustee Duncan, do you want to amend your motion to include staff?
Yeah, I think we can do that as a friendly amendment. And thanks to the superintendent for highlighting that fact, because yeah, certainly we want to make sure that if there is a need to add anything to the policy that speaks to just speaks to the changes, if any, that are needed around enrollment, that we do so before the board meeting. So thank you.
I'm wondering if there aren't any further comments. Trustee Duncan, would you mind reading your motion one more time before we vote?
Yeah, so it would just be that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, refer the draft policy with suggested amendments to the May Board of Education meeting, and further provide a copy of the draft policy to rights holders, stakeholders, and relevant district staff, inviting comment in advance of the May board meeting.
Excellent. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you, Trustee Duncan. Okay, so before we move forward to item C3 of the agenda, I just want to take a moment to thank the committee and all those in attendance for being patient with me. I know I'm fairly new at chairing this committee, and it can be quite challenging when there are very emotional issues that come up and everybody has a lot to say. And I just want to remind everybody that any comments or questions are to go through the chair, which is me, just to avoid falling into debate at this meeting. So with that, I would like to pass it over to Trustee Duncan for item C3 of the agenda, School Police Liaison Officer Committee recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so folks, we're going to start with C3A, which is on page 23 of the packet. So it begins with a memo that just outlines some background information about the work of the committee. So just a reminder that the committee was established by the board to undertake discussions with members of the school community, including but not limited to racialized, Indigenous, and LGBTQ+ staff, parents, and students, to determine what, if any, concerns there may be regarding the district school police liaison officer program, and also to develop recommendations as required on what changes should be made to the program to improve its value to the school community, including consideration of cessation of the program. So we met on a number of occasions starting in November 2020, and the committee worked into the spring of 2022, where we paused while stakeholders stepped away from that work, and then we reconvened in early 2023 in order to complete the set of recommendations, which are in the packet this evening. I just want to note that the list of meetings in the memo is incomplete because in the end, we did as a committee meet one more time on the 20th of April of this year. And so I just want to recognize that there was one final meeting on the 20th of April, 2023. So the committee was made up of 21 members, and that included a place for 4 student representatives, 1 representative from the Esquimalt Nation, 2 representatives from GVTA, 2 reps from QB, 2 representatives from VCPAC, 1 rep from the Victoria Police Department, and 1 representative from the Saanich Police Department with an alternate, 2 members of the senior leadership team, 2 school district administrators, 1 school district communication staff member, and 2 trustees. Those were all the members of the committee. We discussed different topics, including our terms of reference, specifically wanting to be clear that we all had a common understanding of the purpose and deliverables. We discussed the timeline of the committee's work and the role of the school police liaison officers. We discussed the importance of student and parent voice, the importance of considering the program through the lens of racism and discrimination, and possible recommendations pertaining to what might be required to improve the program or the option of cessation. And so to complete this work, we invited committee members to participate in an anti-racism workshop provided by Dr. Musa Magasa. And the committee also received a communications plan that was developed by the communications department, which set out, again, the timetable and really provided an overall guide for our work. The committee, besides, we've heard about the survey, and the engagement report speaks to the survey that we issued to the school community. But we also had a speaker series and invited folks to come and make presentations to the committee. So we received presentations from, for instance, the Greater Victoria Teachers Association, Victoria Immigrant and Refugee Center Society. We also received presentations from MIST, Crime Reduction and Exploitation Diversion Coordinator from MIST. We received feedback from a number of stakeholders. I won't go through the list, but it is included as a bulleted list in the memo. So then finally, we did complete our engagement in early 2022. And then at that point, we started to, again, consider possible recommendations. I want to highlight again, because it seems to be a source of some confusion, the work of the committee. So our terms of reference really required us to reach consensus. And where we couldn't reach consensus, the terms of reference really requires us to bring forward all of the recommendations that were submitted to the committee, regardless of who they came from. And so what you'll see in the pack-up this evening is a full list of all the recommendations that were received by the committee, regardless of who they came from, because the committee was unable to reach consensus. The list of recommendations are separated into two categories. And I just want to really note for the benefit of folks listening, but also for, in particular, folks in attendance this evening, you know, it really is the Board of Education who is the decision maker in this case. And so if the board, in reviewing the materials provided by the committee, feels that there are gaps or other information that the board requires in order to make a determination one way or the other, then it will be for the board to decide that, and then to direct for that additional information to be collected. This evening, what we're hoping to do, besides start an initial discussion, is to really just receive the committee's work. So in addition to the recommendations, there is also a link to the thousands of pages of information received by the committee. And, you know, in recognizing that there is a significant volume of information, and that the board's stakeholders and rights holders will only have received that information on Friday in preparation for this evening. I will be recommending to my board colleagues that we take some time to consider the backup materials, and that we consider, you know, the decision that is required by the board at a special board meetings to be scheduled in May. So I guess at this point, Chair, I'm happy to answer questions that folks may have regarding the packet materials or potential next steps. And then, as I indicated, I'll be moving a motion to recommend that we consider everything at a special board meeting in May.
Thank you very much, Trustee Duncan. So yeah, if anybody has questions, please raise your hand and we'll go through them one at a time. I'm not seeing any questions, which is not what I expected. Okay. Go ahead. Oh, I see Trustee Bayo's hand, so I'll pass it over to them.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Trustee Duncan that, you know, I also joined this committee rather late today. So I had looked at the packet material, but hadn't started reading through it, let alone getting close to all of the 2,000 pages. So yes, I just agree that I really like a chance to really sit and read through everything. I think moving it to a board meeting where the board as a whole can discuss it in detail yeah, is a good next step.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Trustee Bio. I'm in agreement as well. Go ahead, Trustee Duncan.
Well, considering where we are, then maybe it's appropriate. What I'll do is I'll just put in chat the proposed motion. Let me just send that to everybody.
And I'll second the motion.
Excellent. So we have a motion. We have a motion on the table. We have a seconder, and any discussion around the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much for that, trustees. With that, I'll move us along in our agenda. There is no notice of motion. There is no general announcements. And so can I get a mover for adjournment? I see Trustee Bio's hand. All those in favor? And the meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone.